Hector Hugh Munro, or Saki, was born in British Burma in 1870 and was educated almost entirely by governesses before being sent to England at the age of 12 to further his education. He would return to India to follow in his father's footsteps as an imperial police officer, but returned to England after several bouts of fever laid him out. Munro began writing historical pieces for British magazines, but soon moved to writing political satire for newspapers. Much of his work contrasts the conventions of Victorian and Edwardian England with ruthless, honest struggles of nature and humanity. Many figures in authority meet their untimely deaths or downfalls to the whims of nature, his most famous being the Interlopers and the Toys of Peace. Look for wit and wisdom, even the macabre, in Saki's characters to learn a moral lesson, as his characters haplessly forge ahead to their gloom and doom. The Philanthropist and the Happy Cat by Saki. Jocantha Bestbury was in the mood to be serenely and graciously happy. Her world was a pleasant place, and it was wearing one of its pleasantest aspects. Gregory had managed to get home for a hurried lunch and a smoke afterwards in the little snuggery. The lunch had been a good one, and there was just time to do justice to the coffee and cigarettes. Both were excellent in their way, and Gregory was, in his way, an excellent husband. Jocantha rather suspected herself of making him a very charming wife, and more than suspected herself of having a first-rate dressmaker. "I don't suppose a more thoroughly contented personality is to be found in all of Chelsea," observed Jocantha in allusion to herself. "Except perhaps a Tab," she continued, glancing towards the large tabby-marked cat that lay in considerable ease in a corner of the divan. "He lies there purring and dreaming, shifting his limbs now and then in an ecstasy of cushioned comfort. He seems the incarnation of everything soft and silky and velvety, without a sharp edge in his composition, a dreamer whose philosophy is sleep and let sleep. And then as evening draws on, he goes out into the garden with a red glint in his eyes, and slays a drowsy sparrow. As every pair of sparrows hatches out 10 or more young ones in the year, while their food supply remains stationary, it is just as well that the Tabs of the community should have that idea of how to pass an amusing afternoon," said Gregory. Having delivered himself on this sage comment, he lit another cigarette, bade Jocantha a playfully affectionate goodbye, and departed into the outer world. "Remember, dinner's a wee bit earlier tonight, as we're going to the Haymarket," she called after him. Left to herself, Jocantha continued the process of looking at her life with placid, introspective eyes. If she had not everything she wanted in this world, at least she was very well pleased with what she had got. She was somehow very well pleased, for instance, with the snuggery, which contrived somehow to be cozy and dainty and expensive all at once. The porcelain was rare and beautiful. The Chinese enamels took on wonderful tints in the firelight. The rugs and hangings led the eye through sumptuous harmonies of coloring. It was a room in which one might have suitably entertained an ambassador or an archbishop, but it was also a room in which one could cut out pictures for a scrapbook without feeling that one was scandalizing the deities of the place with one's litter. And as with the snuggery, so with the rest of the house. And as with the house, so with the other departments of Jocantha's life. She really had good reason for being one of the most contented women in Chelsea. From being in a mood of simmering satisfaction with her lot, she passed to the phase of being generously commiserating for those thousands around her whose lives and circumstances were dull, cheap, pleasureless, and empty. Work girls, shop assistants, and so forth, the class that have neither the happy-go-lucky freedom of the poor nor the leisured freedom of the rich, came specially within the range of her sympathy. It was sad to think that there were young people who after a long day's work had to sit alone in the chill, dreary bedrooms because they could not afford the price of a cup of coffee and a sandwich in a restaurant, still less a shilling for a theater gallery. Jocantha's mind was still dwelling on this theme when she started forth on an afternoon campaign of desultory shopping. It would be rather a comforting thing, she told herself, if she could do something, on the spur of the moment, to bring a gleam of pleasure and interest into the life of even one or two wistful-hearted, empty-pocketed workers. It would add a good deal of her sense of enjoyment at the theater that night. She would get 2 upper-circle tickets for a popular play, make her way into some cheap tea shop, and present the tickets to the first couple of interesting work girls with whom she could casually drop into conversation. She could explain matters by saying that she was unable to use the tickets herself and did not want them to be wasted. And on the other hand, did not want the trouble of sending them back. On further reflection, she decided it might be better to get only one ticket and give it to some lonely-looking girl sitting eating her frugal meal by herself. The girl might scrape acquaintance with her next-seat neighbor at the theater and lay the foundations of a lasting friendship. With the fairy godmother impulse strong upon her, Jocantha marched into a ticket agency and selected with immense care an upper circle seat for The Yellow Peacock, a play that was attracting a considerable amount of discussion and criticism. Then she went forth in search of a tea shop and philanthropic adventure, at about the same time that Atab sauntered into the garden with a mind attuned to sparrow stalking. In the corner of an ABC shop, she found an unoccupied table, whereat she promptly installed herself, impelled by the fact that at the next table was sitting a young girl, rather plain of feature, with tired, listless eyes, and a general air of uncomplaining forlornness. Her dress was of poor material, but aimed at being in the fashion. Her hair was pretty, but her complexion bad. She was finishing a modest meal of tea and scone, and she was not very different in her way from thousands of other girls who were finishing, or beginning, or continuing their teas in London tea shops at that exact moment. The odds were enormously in favor of the supposition that she had never seen the Yellow Peacock. Obviously, she supplied excellent material for Jocantha's first experiment in haphazard benefaction. Jocantha ordered some tea and a muffin, and then turned a friendly scrutiny on her neighbor, with a view to catching her eye. At that precise moment, the girl's face lit up with sudden pleasure. Her eyes sparkled and a flush came into her cheeks, and she looked almost pretty. A young man whom she greeted with an affectionate, "Well, hello, Bertie," came up to her table, and he took his seat in a chair facing her. Jocantha looked hard at the newcomer. He was in appearance a few years younger than herself, very much better looking than Gregory, rather better looking, in fact, than any of the young men of her set. She guessed him to be a well-mannered young clerk in some wholesale warehouse, existing and amusing himself as best he might on a tiny salary, and commanding a holiday of about 2 weeks in the year. He was aware, of course, of his good looks, but with the shy self-consciousness of the Anglo-Saxon, not the blatant complacency of a Latin or a Semite. He was obviously on terms of friendly intimacy with the girl he was talking to. Probably they were drifting towards a formal engagement. Jocantha pictured the boy's home in a rather narrow circle, with a tiresome mother who always wanted to know how and where he spent his evenings. He would exchange that humdrum thraldom in due course for a home of his own, dominated by a chronic scarcity of pounds, shillings, and pence, and with a dearth of most of the things that made life attractive or comfortable. Jocantha felt extremely sorry for him. She wondered if he'd seen the Yellow Peacock. The odds were enormously in favor of the supposition that he had not. The girl had finished her tea and would shortly be going back to her work. When the boy was alone, it would be quite easy for Jocantha to say, "My husband has made other arrangements for me this evening. Would you care to make use of this ticket, which would otherwise be wasted?" Then she could come there again one afternoon for tea, and if she saw him, ask him how he liked the play. If he was a nice boy and improved on acquaintance, he could be given more theater tickets, perhaps asked to come one Sunday to tea at Chelsea. Jocantha made up her mind that he would improve on acquaintance, and that Gregory would like him, and that the fairy godmother business would prove far more entertaining than she had originally anticipated. The boy was distinctly presentable. He knew how to brush his hair, which was possibly an imitative faculty. He knew what color of tie suited him, which might be intuition. He was exactly the type that Jocantha admired, which of course was accident. Altogether, she was rather pleased when the girl looked at the clock and bade a friendly but hurried farewell to her companion. Bertie nodded good-bye, gulped down a mouthful of tea, and then produced from his overcoat pocket a paper-covered book bearing the title Sepoy and Sahib, A Tale of the Great Mutiny. The laws of tea-shop etiquette forbid that you should offer theater tickets to a stranger without having first caught the stranger's eye. It is even better if you ask to have that sugar basin passed to you, having previously concealed the fact that you have a large and well-filled sugar basin on your own table. This is not difficult to manage, as the printed menu is generally nearly as large as the table, and can be made to stand on end. Jocantha set to work hopefully. She had a long and rather high-pitched discussion with the waitress concerning alleged defects in an altogether blameless muffin. She made loud and plaintive inquiries about the tube service to some impossibly remote suburb. She talked with brilliant insincerity to the tea-shop kitten, and as a last resort she upset a milk jug and swore at it daintily. Altogether she attracted a good deal of attention, but never for a moment did she attract the attention of the boy with the beautifully brushed hair, who was some thousands of miles away in the baking plains of Hindustan, amid deserted bungalows and seething bazaars and riotous barrack squares, listening to the throbbing tom-toms and the distant rattle of musketry. Jocantha went back to her house in Chelsea, which struck her for the first time as looking dull and overfurnished. She had a resentful conviction that Gregory would be uninteresting at dinner, and that the play would be stupid after dinner. On the whole, her frame of mind showed a marked divergence from the purring complacency of a tab, who was again curled up in his corner of the divan, with a great peace radiating from every curve of his body. But then, he had killed his sparrow.